The dust lay on the street like sifted ash, fine enough to coat a man's teeth when he breathed. Noon heat pressed down on the town of Red Willow until even the flies seemed reluctant to move. At the far end of the street, under the warped awning of the employment board, a woman stood with her hands folded at her waist, listening to men talk about her as though she were a horse brought in lame. She shook her head once. Then again, "No," she said quietly. The third man spat and turned away. "Your loss," he muttered, though the look he gave her was the kind men reserved for broken tools. Across the street, a cowboy leaned against the false front wall of the livery stable, one boot propped behind him, his hat pulled low enough to shade his eyes. He had been there long enough for the stable hand to forget he was not part of the building. Dust had settled on his coat shoulders. His horse stood tied nearby, head low, reins slack. He watched the woman step back from the board. 3 jobs. She'd turned down 3 jobs in less than 10 minutes. That was uncommon in Red Willow. The cowboy pushed off the wall and crossed the street. His boots sounded louder than they should have in the quiet. She heard him when he was still a few steps away and turned, wary, already tired. He stopped at a polite distance. He said. She waited, eyes leveled with his chest. Then she looked up. Her face held no softness, but there was something unguarded in her eyes, like a door left ajar out of habit. "Why? Why?" he asked. She blinked. "Why? What? Why you keep saying no?" For a moment she seemed to weigh him, the way people did when deciding whether to spend the effort on honesty. The sun caught in her hair, turning the loose strands the color of old wheat. "'Cause those weren't jobs," she said. "They were cages." He nodded once, as though she had confirmed something he already suspected. "My name's Silas Reed," he said. "If you don't mind me asking, what kind of work are you looking for?" She almost laughed. Ah! A breath she hadn't meant to release. "That depends," she said. "What kind of man is asking?" Silas did not answer right away. He looked past her, down the length of the street. A pair of deputies stood in the shade by the sheriff's office, watching nothing and everything at once. Beyond them, the saloon doors hung open, breathing out the smell of sour whiskey and old smoke. "A man passing through," he said finally, "who don't like cages much himself." She studied him a long time. "My name's Annabelle," she said. "Ach, and I don't believe in passing men." Silas felt something tighten behind his ribs. He tipped his hat. "Fair enough." They stood there, the two of them, while the town held its breath around them. Red Willow had been built crooked, as though the land itself had tried to shake it off. Most of the buildings leaned a little, roofs sagging, boards warped by years of sun and wind. The town lived on cattle money and desperation in equal measure. Ranchers came through to hire hands for wages that barely kept a man fed. Others came through for the saloon, the gambling tables, the women who waited upstairs behind painted doors. Annabelle had been offered all of it. She turned away from the board and began walking down the street. Silas fell in beside her without asking. They walked slow, their shadows long and distorted on the ground. "You got a place to stay?" he asked. "For tonight," she said. "Tomorrow depends." He nodded again. They passed the general store where sacks of flour were stacked like barricades. The storekeeper watched them through the window, his eyes sharp as nails. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "North," Silas said. "Got a small spread up past Dry Creek. Needs fixing more than it needs a man." She glanced at him. "You own it? Bought it cheap off a widow who wanted out?" "Always a widow," she said. He did not smile. They stopped outside the boarding house. It was a narrow building with lace curtains gone yellow from smoke. A woman with tired eyes sat on the porch shelling peas into a tin bowl. "This is me?" Anna said. Silas hesitated. There was more he wanted to say, but the words had not yet found a shape. "Those men," he said instead. "They trouble you. They trouble everyone," she said. "Just depends how loud." She turned to go, then paused. "Why'd you ask?" she said. "About the jobs?" Silas met her gaze. "Because I've watched people sell pieces of themselves before," he said, "and I've watched what it leaves behind." She nodded once. "Then you understand," she said. She went inside, the door closing soft behind her. Silas stood there a moment longer, then walked back to the stable. He untied his horse, swung into the saddle, and rode out of town with the sun low at his back. The ranch north of Dry Creek was little more than a shack in a stretch of stubborn land that refused to grow much of anything. The house leaned toward the east, as if listening for something that never came. Silas had built the corral himself, the posts set deep and crooked. There were days the silence pressed on him harder than any crowd. He liked it that way. He unsaddled his horse, rubbed her down, and let her loose in the pen. Then he went inside and sat on the edge of his bed, boots still on, hands resting on his knees. He thought of Annabelle standing under that awning, dust clinging to her skirt. He thought of the way she said no. Silas Reed had not always been a quiet man. There had been a time when his voice carried across camps and his laughter filled the night air. There had been a time when he believed the world could be bent with enough force. That time had ended in blood. He lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling until sleep took him. Red Willow did not forget people easily. It was a town that fed on memory, twisting stories until they fit the needs of whoever told them last. By the time Silas rode back in 3 days later with a wagon load of supplies, the talk had already shifted. "She ain't picky," someone said in the saloon. "She's waiting." "Waiting for what?" another man asked. "A buyer," came the answer, low and certain. Silas did not stop. He unloaded his goods at the store, paid in cash, and turned back toward the boarding house. Anna was on the porch again, this time mending a tear in a child's shirt. The woman shelling peas sat beside her, eyes half closed. Anna looked up when she heard the horse. "You're back," she said. "So are you," Silas replied. She tied off the thread and set the shirt aside. "They've started talking," she said. "They always do," he said. "They say I'm waiting to be bought." And she shrugged. "They always want a story that makes them feel like the world makes sense." Silas leaned against the porch rail. "You could come north with me," he said. "There's work. Honest work."
What?
Her needle stilled. "And what would that make?" "Me," she asked. "A woman with dirt under her nails," he said. "Same as me." She looked at him then, really looked, as if measuring the weight of his words. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch," he said. "Just quiet." "And hard days and nights?" she asked softly. Silas met her eyes. "You'd have your own room." She watched him a long moment. "I'll think on it," she said. That night, Red Willow burned. It started in the saloon, a fight over a debt that no one remembered incurring. A bottle broke. A gun came out. Someone screamed. By the time the fire took hold, it had a hunger of its own. Silas was on the street when the flames leapt skyward. He saw men run with buckets, their faces lit orange. He saw deputies stand back, hands on their belts, eyes cold. The boarding house caught first. Silas did not think, ran. Porch was already gone when he reached it. Smoke poured from the windows, thick and choking. He heard shouting inside Anna. He called, no answer. He pulled his shirt over his mouth and went in. The heat was a living thing, pressing against him. He moved by memory, by instinct. He found the stairs by touch, his hand sliding along the wall until it blistered. On the second, Flory kicked indoors until he found her. She was coughing, eyes wide, clutching a bundle of clothes. He grabbed her and dragged her back the way he came, the smoke tearing at his lungs. They burst out into the street as the roof collapsed. Behind them, Anna sank to her knees, gasping. Silas knelt beside her, one hand on her shoulder. "You're safe," he said, though his voice shook. She looked up at him, her face streaked with soot and tears. "They locked the door," she said. Silas's jaw tightened. He helped her to her feet. Around them, the town watched, some with fear, some with calculation. The sheriff stood near the edge of the crowd, his hat shadowing his eyes. He did not move. "You best leave," the sheriff said, "before things get worse." Silas met his gaze. "They already are," he said. The next morning, the auction was announced. They called it a labor sale. Men gathered in the square, money in their pockets, eyes bright. Anna stood apart, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, her face set. Silas stood beside her. "This ain't right," she said. "No," he agreed. The auctioneer mounted the platform. He began to talk about opportunity, about mutual benefit. Silas waited. When the bidding started, stepped forward. "I'll take her," he said. The crowd murmured. "What's your offer?" the auctioneer asked. "Freedom," Silas said. Laughter rippled through the square. The sheriff stepped forward. "This ain't the place for jokes." Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a deed worn at the edges. "My land," he said. "Sign it over to her." The crowd fell silent. Anna stared at him. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he replied. The sheriff hesitated. He had not expected this. "Do it," someone shouted. "See if he's serious." Silas held the deed out. The sheriff took it, examined it, then looked back at Silas. "You know what this means?" he said. Silas nodded. "I do." The sheriff signed. The auctioneer announced the sale complete. Anna took the paper with shaking hands. "What now?" she asked. Silas smiled, just barely. "Now you own a piece of quiet," he said. That night Silas packed his things. He left the shack, the corral, the land he had worked for with his own hands. He rode south, back toward the places he had once fled. Anna rode north alone. Years later, travelers would speak of a woman who ran a small ranch by Dry Creek, who hired fair and paid fair, who said no when no was needed, and sometimes on the long road, a quiet cowboy would pass through Red Willow, tip his hat, keep riding. The town never understood what had been lost, but the land remembered.